How much skill does it take to paint a vine leaf? How much skill does it take to paint a vine grove? How much skill does it take to paint a Bacchic procession moving through that vine grove, laughing, drinking, joking? And how much more skill would it take to cup a glass cylinder in your hands and engrave that same scene on its smooth surface, knowing that of the many thousands of individual incisions you must make, the entire piece would be ruined by just one single slip? Because paint can always be painted over, but glass can never be uncut. So, how much skill would that take? Is such a feat even humanly possible? In the modern world, the three great eras of glass manufacture took place in Italy in the 13th century, in England in the 17th century, and in Bohemia in the 19th century. Of the master craftsmen of the Bohemian period, 4 names in particular are celebrated to this day: Karl Pfoll, Franz Paul Zach, August Bohm, and Carl Anton Gunter. Although no pictures or photographs of Günther have survived, we do have this sketch of his home and workshop, which appeared in the American Magazine of Literature, Art, and Science in October 1851. Judging from this idyllic scene, one could be forgiven for imagining its occupant to have been a mild-mannered rustic artisan. In fact, Carl Anton Gunter was a veritable firebrand, the enfant terrible of art glass. While still a young man, he left his native Bohemia and headed to Paris, where he worked for a succession of glass companies, including Baccarat. He then moved to Munich and, after several arrests, was subsequently deported back to Steinschonau in Bohemia, pictured here on a postcard of the time. There he went to great lengths to help the needy, bathing lice-ridden tramps and even once stealing a whole cooked goat to feed to the poor. At one point he actually lived in a cave, setting up his workshop in the woods and carving the trees and animals he saw around him. Eventually he died in Prague at the age of 75, half-blind and penniless. From just this short description, it's clear that Günther epitomized the devil-may-care artistic independence that the term bohemian has come to denote. He also possessed extremely shrewd metaphysical sensibilities. Together, these qualities perfectly qualified him to portray that most paradoxical deity of the classical pantheon, the god Bacchus. To understand the subtleties and contradictions of Bacchus's nature and how Günther was able to capture these in his masterpiece, we'll split the vase into 5 zones, examining the symbols, motifs, and dramatic scenarios depicted within each. Around the rim of the vase there is a series of fearsome masks, alternated with vine leaves. The masks are grisly, but yet at the same time evocative of high culture. It was a strict rule of Greek tragedy that every actor wear a Bacchic mask of this type. Sinister, yet erudite. That's quite a discordant combination. This clash of opposites in harmony appears again and again throughout the vase, as we shall go on to see. The masks blend seamlessly into the vine mantle, which in turn blends seamlessly into the figures beneath. As an effect, this is striking in its own right. However, there are two additional reasons for this fluidity. The first is to emphasize that the spirit of Bacchus resides deep within the fruit of the vine. The second is perhaps best understood by a comparison with a companion vase fashioned by Günther's most celebrated pupil, Franz Paul Zach. This piece, which is housed at London's Victoria and Albert Museum, also depicts a Bacchic procession. We can immediately note, however, that it has no background whatsoever. No leaves, no trees, no buildings, nothing, not a single feature. Zach deliberately left the background blank in order to accentuate the dynamic movement of the foreground figures. In contrast, rather than affording us a grandstand view of the procession, Günther seeks to secrete us within it, almost as a hidden witness. Peering down through the vine mantle, we behold the strange chimerical creatures escort the god through the grove with a sense of privileged intimacy. Observing, but ourselves unobserved, we gaze in fascination as the curious pageant passes by. At the rear of the cavalcade is a trio of Bacchic children. Look at those chubby faces. Look at their playful antics. Look how drunk they are. Below them on the ground is a baby faun, a half-goat, half-human creature, who together with another Bacchic child is trying to topple over the elderly man in front. A cruel prank, one might think, were it not once again for the harmonious clash of opposites. For Bacchus is not merely the god of wine and revelry, but also of prophetic insight, and the balding, sad-faced man we see here is none other than Silenus, the most revered of his followers. Long ago this wisest of sages had divined that good and bad are woven equally into the fabric of existence, and had learned to treat both with total philosophical detachment. The first thing we notice about Bacchus himself is that he doesn't seem, well, very godlike. Is that a chariot or a wheelchair? And that beer gut? It's huge. If we're feeling generous, we might say he looks affable enough, albeit a little pitiful, like an old drunk who has to be wheeled in and out of the pub. The satyr who pours his wine is a similarly ambiguous figure. Obliging, certainly, but facially grotesque. Once again, that unnerving juxtaposition of opposites. It is as we move into the fifth and final zone, however, that these continuing discordances start to become truly alarming. Bacchus's chariot is drawn by a pair of panthers, the most aggressive of the wild cats. A Bacchic child holds them on a tight leash, but just imagine if they were to be set loose. Behind them stands a satyr clutching a ritual staff known as a thyrsus. This would perhaps invest him with a measure of ceremonial gravity, were it not for the left side of his face, which Günther has distorted slightly upwards to lend it a macabre asymmetry. Next to him is a Maenad, one of the female followers of Bacchus, whose extremes of orgiastic excess were known to drive them into the realms of insanity. Judging from her neutral facial expression, it may be hard to think her capable of such, but if you have any doubts, just take a look at those hypersexualized hips. So is this the awful truth that the final stage of the procession reveals? That Bacchus is a dangerous, powerful god? Actually, no. There is an awful truth about Bacchus, but that's not it. Because the power, or more accurately, the powers, rest entirely with us. What Bacchus offers through the fruit of the vine is simply a key to unlock the immense psychobiological forces that lie deep within us. When those forces are released, at one extreme, the torrent can indeed drive us to the horrific depths of indignity, self-degradation, and death. But, at the other extreme, it can also transport us to the ecstatic heights of artistic transcendence and prophetic wisdom. No, the awful truth about that old fellow in the chair, the really awful truth, is that he's not the least bit bothered either way.